Thank you for listening.
Folks, right here, this is very inconvenient, but I forgot to put tape there, and the band is going to be about the first 3 rows where you're sitting, so I'm very sorry. I should have been on top of that. If you can move back, I appreciate it. Thank you. That was my bad. Thank you. You have 4 rows back. It's great. That's awesome. Thank you. All right, get on stage. I'll go get it. All right, let's go.
Hello and welcome. If you do not know me, my name is Mr. Blythe. I'm the band director here at Chippewa Middle School, and welcome to the 2025 edition of Okemos Jazz Night. The other Chippewa Jazz Band did not get the memo about coming in the auditorium after the first one left, so we are getting them in here. While we do that, they will make their way to their seats. On stage before you is the Thursday Jazz Band. There are two jazz bands here at Chippewa. This one is aptly named because they meet for 1 hour a week on Thursday. And they have done an awesome job of learning a lot of material in a very short amount of time. So we are going to start with a nice jazz standard called Jada. Thank you very much. So I want to explain a little bit of what you were seeing. You're seeing a lot of students moving around, a lot of students doing what we call improvisation, where they're given a few tools and then taught how to do solos. We have a rule here at Chippewa that if students want to solo, I don't say no, because I want every one of them to do a solo. And some of them have been told, haven't you? They don't want to admit it, but they do a really great job. Just a quick show of hands in the Thursday Jazz Band. Who is an 8th grader right now? Who will be a high schooler next year? Very good. Who is a 7th grader right now? Who is playing an instrument they do not normally play in concert band? That, I think, is very impressive. Who's in the orchestra? Finn, raise your hand. There we go. That makes sense. And the piano player. And finally, who's in the choir? Good job. We have another short little tune for you called Our First Blues. This is how we work on learning the 12-bar blues, which is sort of the foundation of a lot.
You're good.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lalonde. Okay, so this is kind of a foundation of a lot of school jazz music. It helps them learn a lot.
Are we good? Okay, we're good. All right, please enjoy Our First Blues. As many of you know, but for those of you that don't, improvisation is such a foundational part of what jazz music is that I really spend a lot of time trying to be sure that students get a decent foundation here at Chippewa. This band last year attended the Hastings Jazz Festival, and the Thursday Jazz Band was complimented for the number of students that we have auditioned. This band got a lot of compliments from adjudicators, from clinicians, from other band directors of, wow, it's awesome to see how many of them are really learning to improvise. So I think they all deserve another hand for that. The next tune is written with the 1940s in mind. It is kind of reminiscent of the swing band era, and it is called Swing Band Swing. Okay, we have one more tune for you, and then we are going to have the high school jazz ensemble come up. We are going to play a tune by Larry Meek called We've Got This. While they are shifting around, in the back of your program, you will notice two QR codes. The first one is for a wonderful booster organization, the Okemos Music Patrons. The second is for the guest artists that will be performing with the high school band. There's some really awesome information about them, so if you scan that, you can see more about our wonderful guest artists, and Mr. Stice will talk much more about them. But in the meantime, the Thursday Jazz Band's last tune, We've Got This. This is just level one where jazz starts to be taught in Okemos, and I'm really happy you get to see the progression all the way through the night. All right, so Thursday, folks, we are going to go out backstage the way we came, and then you're going to go around, and you're going to sit down there where the high scores are. You understand that? Cool. All right, so let's go that way, and now the high scores can come on down.
This next number, this is You Don't Say, and it's going to feature Alden and Isaac on the trombone. Enjoy You Don't Say. Let's hear it for Erica, for Alden, and for Mike. That is one for me. You know, as Mr. Blythe mentioned earlier, it's just great that we're able to see such wonderful growth when it comes to jazz education here in Okemos. And you know, I think that he and I are both as passionate about jazz band with each other about it because it's America's truest form of music, and to be able to bring that to students, I think, is extremely important, and especially to hear our students at such a young age get up and improvise as well as what they were doing. Let's hear it again for our middle school jazz band members. They did an awesome job. And Mr. Blythe and I are talking about how much of a problem this is, but these are the problems that we love to have, you know, where we're going to have to figure out like how we can adjust and accommodate such a growing jazz program here in Okemos. So your support and your you know, undying ability to like encourage your students to do this is really, really helpful and impactful on this program. So we want to thank you for that. Our last tune is called Road Runner. Thank you very much, and hope you enjoy it. Let's hear for our soloists on that. Layla, Autumn, we had Sophia and Nick, and am I missing somebody? And Isaac and Alexa. Let's hear it for them. Thank you so much. We'll be right back with another jazz band in just a moment.
All right, if we give them a hand for quick transitions, that's pretty sweet. Hey, Caleb, can we borrow your hand, bud? Where'd you go? You're welcome. Can we borrow your hand? Or somebody's hand? Thank you. Teamwork makes the dream work. All right, while they're getting that set up, on stage before you is the Tuesday Jazz Band, aptly named because they meet on Tuesday afternoons. The Tuesday Jazz Band at Chippewa is chosen by audition, so these students submit a video to me, and then they are selected by an audition process. Just a quick introduction while we're getting set up. Can you raise your hand if you were in 8th grade? You're going to be a high schooler next year. All right, very good. Put your hands down. Can you raise your hand if you are in 7th grade? It's a pretty good split. Good. Next, in 2 weeks, both the Chippewa Jazz Bands are going to the Hastings Thornapple Jazz Festival in Hastings, Michigan. Families, you got an email from me on Friday about submitting payment for that, so I appreciate your support. The students get to go play for a clinician. This year it is the jazz drum set professor from Western Michigan University. He's an awesome jazz educator. He's going to have a lot of really awesome feedback for them. I cannot wait for them to listen to hear him talk and give them feedback. And then after that, of course, we eat pizza and go play in the playground because what trip is complete without that. So that is coming up in the next 2 weeks. We are going to open with a tune for you called Avenue Swing. Next is a tune by George Shutak. It's actually a rock ballad, so you will not hear any song style in here. It features our own Tapan on the alto saxophone. It is a beautiful ballad called Falling Water. There is a house built by an architect named Frank Lloyd Wright, who he actually built a house on top of a waterfall. And so this tune, and it's in a very peaceful setting in the hills of Pennsylvania. My parents were kind enough to take me there when I was a kid. Thanks, Mom and Dad, appreciate you. And it's a beautiful setting. And Tapan does a wonderful job of making this beautiful setting come to life. So please enjoy Falling Water. Please give it up for Tina on the piano solo. And one more time for Tapan. Starting last year, I had this kind of crazy idea that we have such a wonderful choir program here, why not involve some of them? And last year we had a student from high school who sang with the band, and this year we have a student from middle school. And having a vocalist is something really fun that not a lot of middle school bands get to do, so we are very fortunate, and we are graced with the talents of this vocalist. Can everyone please welcome to the stage Maddie Edley. But let's give it up to her one more time. So this next tune features a trumpet player, and this trumpet player's father asked me to let you know how his day was. So he was in Toledo, right? Toledo playing soccer, and then finished his game, got in the car, and here he is. And it's just another point of pride for the Okemos band program, where we have students that do so many things, including students that travel all the way to Toledo to play soccer, and still come here and wow you with their trumpet players. This tune features Thomas Locke. Give us a wave. There he is. And it is called Big Band Rumble. Give it up for Colton on the drum set. And one more time for Thomas Locke on trumpet. We are going to welcome Maddie back out to do one more tune. It's a very common jazz standard, and it is beloved by jazz musicians and everyone everywhere. And it is called "It Don't Mean a Thing If It Ain't Got That Swing." Want to share one little more tidbit about the band. They played last year at Hastings as well. Some of the members were there on the Tuesday Jazz, and the clinician came up and he said, "I thought they were a high school for a second." And I think they should all be very proud of that. Speaking of high school, here comes the Okemos High School Jazz Band. Thank you for being here so far, and that is it for Chippewa Jazz Bands, but wait, there's more. Thank you very much.
Let's give it up one more time for our middle school jazz bands. And we are the Okemos High School Jazz Band. We're really excited to be here today. And before I introduce our special guest, I want to thank these students for giving up so much because not only did most of them performed Thursday at Western Michigan University, but then had a brush-up rehearsal Friday after school for a jazz festival that we played at yesterday morning at Michigan State University, and then they're back here again today. I heard through the grapevine, I got to get some official word on this though, but as a result of our performance yesterday at the MSU Jazz Spectacular, that our trombone section was given an honorable mention as an outstanding section. And I gotta get the name yet, but either Callie or Elizabeth were named as an outstanding soloist. So, they just sent a trombone player. And I hate to drop numbers in this moment, but over 20 years ago, I met a young man when he was working on his bachelor's degree at Michigan State University by the name of Chris Johnson. I followed his career all through his through his college time, and he and I worked collaboratively together at my previous school before coming to Okemos. And you know, this year I was sitting there thinking about like what could I do to bring in a featured guest and who could that be? And so I wrote a grant to the Okemos Education Foundation. And I wanted to put that out there because here's your money at work that you donate to the OEF, and I hope that you continue to do so. And they provided us with a grant to allow me to bring Chris Johnson out to work with all of our jazz students, and then specifically to dig in with our jazz band and to also be a featured guest tonight. So if you look at on the back side, as Mr. Blythe mentioned, of your program, there's a QR code that will take you to his website. He's currently a professor at the University of Michigan in jazz studies. Tours all over, toured with the Basie Band for a while, and I mean, is just not only an incredible musician, incredible educator, but just one of the best people that I ever get to be around. And so it's with great pleasure to welcome to the stage, Chris Johnson. Let's hear it for Nick on the saxophone, Callie on trombone, and of course the wonderful Chris Johnson. So this jazz festival that we did yesterday at Michigan State University is known as the Jazz Spectacular, but then it's also in conjunction with the Essentially Ellington program out of New York through Lincoln Center, Jazz at Lincoln Center. They require that every year the bands play something off of basically a list that they send out. It's actually all free music. It's a wonderful, wonderful program. And this year they were featuring the music of Jerry Mulligan, and we chose Millennium by Jerry Mulligan, and it features a whole bunch of our students, but it's going to start out with Mr. Nolan Meyer on piano. So hope you enjoy Millennium. Now, not only did we, ask Chris, of course, to solo with us, but he spent a lot of time working with our musicians on jazz style and improvisation, and I hope that you can hear where that is coming through in all of their performances tonight. So I want to hear it one more time for our soloists on that. We had Nick on alto, we have both Callie and Elizabeth on trombone, Alec on the flugelhorn, and of course, the wonderful Chris Johnson. This next one's a fun one. This is called Ready Freddy. Johnson. All right, we have one more for you. This is a great one. I know that many of you recognize this. Recorded by Toto, this is Rosanna. And I guess I should say one more time, I really want to thank Mr. Blythe for all the work that he did getting this concert put together for us. Where's Mr. Blythe at? He needs to stand up and be recognized for his various. And keep putting your hands together for both Lucas and Nathan up there in the live booth that are making this production concert, broadcasting and recording it, and running lights and sound. And again, I want to thank the Okemos Education Foundation for making our guest artist possible with us. Let's give it up one more time for Chris Johnson, everybody. And again, thank you all so much for being here tonight. We hope that you enjoy Rosanna.